Hello and welcome to episode 118 of the Foundry Roundtable, the podcast exclusively covering the Foundry for Star Trek Online. I'm your tame Foundry author, Drogyn1701. With me is gingerbread townsperson Markhawkman.
Good evening.
And Snowconian Greendragoon.
I can finally reveal my final form.
And Snowman Soldier Pax Federatica is our guest tonight.
Greetings, everyone.
It's kind of ironic that you mentioned the gingerbread thing, because I actually did create this outfit specifically for the winter event.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the winter event, because that is, of course, coming right up. In fact, tomorrow, as we speak here, it will start. And which means that I will no longer be getting any work in the Foundry done, because the winter event is when I get all my marks for all my 40-some-odd characters. So,
oddly, unlike some other events, I actually spend more time in the Foundry during the winter event because of the fact that it's a chance for my Foundry character to earn marks by strangling Epos, and, you know, she doesn't get marks all that often the rest of the time.
That's true. I don't think most of us have our Foundry character up to the point where they'd actually use any of their marks, except for you.
Yeah, Tetan's only up to 56, though, so...
But, in any case, it is a lot of fun. I very much enjoy the winter event, especially the PvP race, because I'm actually pretty good at it. And I usually have the time to do a lot of it, so I get tons of marks. So,
well, Tetan always wins the PvP race.
Yeah, except when you go up against me.
Because his Foundry character runs alone.
Oh, runs alone.
Exactly.
Because
nobody's
in your instance.
I've thought about leveling up a Foundry character, but the idea of just going through all of it, not seeing anyone, is just a little creepy to me.
Well, see, the trick to it is to you get the character up high enough that you can start doing duty officer missions, and then you just run the duty officer missions to get XP, and that's your primary source of XP. I mean,
of course, right now that's not so great because DOF missions are a little bit bugged.
This is true, but it's still XP.
you can still fill up your mission list, but I found that the best way is to go into my ship interior and talk to the duty officer guys there.
Yeah, also good. One thing to remember is that you can actually access your department heads while previewing Foundry maps.
Because you can go to your bridge, right?
Well, I mean, like in the duty officer screen, is that you have the tab for department heads. You just click that, and then you can just click on the department head to have that department head's missions pop up.
Oh God, really?
Yeah, you can do that while previewing.
I never knew that. Assignments, there it is. Wow. See, you learn something new every day. But moving along, obviously the big news is the Foundry is back. In fact, last week on Tuesday, it was turned back on. A mere 3-week downtime, which is pretty much the usual.
And there was much rejoicing. Yay!
And there was much restlessness among the natives, as always happens, but that's okay. Nobody completely threw a fit. But yeah, I mean, happy days. The Foundry is back. Not without a few bugs here and there, but fairly minor ones. Getting some people with some difficulty publishing missions gives them an error. And then I believe there's some crashing around the Starbase 24 interior map going on. So hopefully those will get resolved. I know I have used that map
I did notice a minor
somewhere.
glitch with one of the ice cave maps. I didn't actually look inside the map to see if the map was actually just the see if it was actually part of the map geometry that was messed up, or if it was just the little flat 2D map. But one of the ice cave interiors has like a white box as as a substitute, I guess, for like a boulder or something. I'm not sure, but it might actually be that whatever boulder prop that is might be getting rendered as a white box too. I don't know. I didn't think to look at that.
It's worth investigating further.
Yeah. Primar says the publishing bug can be fixed by loading an archived version of that mission and publishing that one.
The problem is with I was having issues publishing with MIDAS Part 2, but that's a well-established mission, so I don't want to move to an archive version.
Yeah, because that would have no reviews on it.
That said, somehow it managed to publish at some point, so it's back up now.
Yeah, and it's not one of those bugs that happens to everybody, because I republished a couple of my missions that for some reason didn't auto republish, and they went up just fine. Now, Dragoon, tell us about the other bug that you encountered.
Well, of all of my mission, MIDAS Part 2 is the only one that didn't auto republish, and when I opened it up, I found out
missions, that's only like 3, right?
I think I've got like 5. 2 MIDAS missions, Eve, and those 2 Foundry Roundtable related missions.
Yeah.
But
anyway.
Part 2 failed to publish because the lowest part of the bounding, or the workable area in the Saratoga map, shifted up a little bit. So it went from negative 7 meters below the floor to negative... it was negative 9 meters up to negative 7 meters. So, and that was enough to put some of my assets I had for a construction I had built on that map out of bounds. Thankfully, I mean, I could just change it around a little bit and get it back within the bounds, but it does raise up the confusing concept of how these kinds of things shift with nobody actually been changing it.
Very confused by that, yeah.
Also,
nothing had changed on that map.
One thing that I observed is that 3 of my missions failed to auto-republish, and they listed something that they refer to as a deprecated asset.
Which is something we've seen in the past.
I don't know what the deprecated asset was, and I was not able to find anything that looked different.
Yeah, and that was the message that we got when they changed over to the new sector space.
Did it let you republish again, or was it still throwing up an error?
I did manage to get at least some of the missions successfully republished.
I think that might just be more of a warning, saying that, oh, something you're using has changed. You're going to want to double check it before you republish.
Well, this is
I think that's what it is.
But as I mentioned before, it prevented them from auto-republishing.
And that may be by design. It may be the deprecated asset error is there to prevent the mission from going out, knowing something has changed without your review first.
Well, yes, but the question is what? As far as I can tell, whatever the change was something so incredibly minor that I wasn't able to find it even by looking through the mission.
Could be.
Yeah, and I've had that same experience. I mean, it doesn't tell you what that was. I think it basically just needed you to open up the mission yourself, and click OK, and that essentially fixes it.
I mean, as always, it's worth checking your missions after an auto republish. Just make sure that everything's still running, because you never know what might have changed.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it doesn't always predict or occur in a predictable manner.
One thing that it might have had something to do with is custom costumes for characters, because that's the only thing I can think of that those missions had in common is I was using custom NPC costumes.
Could be maybe a costume asset changed, or
during the downtime, wasn't that when they tinkered with the KDF boots and stuff like that?
Might have been.
Might have gone live with season 11.
Because it does, like Drogyn said, it doesn't tell you what kind of asset it was even, just that something was changed, and maybe. But on second thought, you remember how we temporarily had the Mirror Audi uniform that we could dress up Foundry characters in? I did not get a deprecated asset warning when that was removed, so at least I don't think I did. So I guess it wasn't a costume then, because
I don't know. Mysteries of the Foundry.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
One thing that I'm guessing is that maybe it was an object that was, I guess you could say, slightly retouched, so that the actual object was registered by the system as being something new that wasn't there before, even though it's not actually different, really.
And as is often the case with automated systems, it may not work perfectly all the time.
That's the truth. So, along with the Foundry being back, we've actually got some Foundry patch notes here from the latest Tribble build. So, for one thing, they have set the Herald groups down to level 57 as a minimum level for those. That was something that was supposed to make it in the last patch, but didn't. So, it should be in this one. This all may go live tomorrow. We'll have to wait and see. Let's see. They updated the description of the locker wall detail objects to include information that one of them is random. So there's one of them, though, which I believe is labeled as random, isn't it? That is sometimes open and sometimes not.
Yeah, and it's something that's kind of thrown people for a loop on occasionally on the past. So it's certainly a nice little quality of life improvement.
That is helpful.
Now if we could just differentiate the tricorder scan for Klingons and Federation.
And let's see, they have...
Klingons don't use tricorders.
They do.
They have also removed the volume in the ancient Iconia template map that was causing issues with backdrops.
I think that was that volume that did... Or
when you go inside
swapping.
Yeah.
Would swap the backdrops.
Mm-hmm. Change the lighting and whatnot. So that will not be there anymore.
Aww.
So which makes me kind of wonder, though. I mean, if it's a volume that can be put into a map, I wonder if it's something that can be put into an asset or how that even works.
Don't know.
Maybe you could have a asset that changes backdrop of a space map from stars to a planet or something like that, or like warping effect to not warping.
That could be extremely useful.
Well, you remember how that one mission, right? Where they had a map set so that it used, I think, 6 different backdrops depending on where you were standing.
Talking about the sphere of influence?
I was just playing that the other day.
Yeah. In fact, that was where they debuted that tech, wasn't it?
It was the first time I had seen it, a backdrop change like that.
I think I remember the devs making a big deal. It's like, oh, we can totally do this. Let's do this.
And, you know, it was a spectacular proof of concept.
We've seen similar tech used for things like coming out of warp.
Mm-hmm.
Or I suppose it could be used in reverse to go into warp. I can think of a number of Foundry authors who have scenes that take place while still in warp coming into a system.
Oh, yeah. Be nice to do that with a backdrop instead of assets.
I got quite a few of those.
Well, in any case, obviously we're all pretty happy for the Foundry to be back. So let's talk about what we've been working on. If those of us who have had the chance to get back into the Foundry, why don't we start with our guest? Pax, what have you been working on?
I've been quite busy since the Foundry came back up, actually. I've done minor revamps of 2 of my missions, Ghost of War Part 3 and Valley of the Shadow 2. In fact, Zeronius Rex was good enough to do a live play of my revamped Valley of the Shadow 2 the other night on her live stream. And also I have begun working on a brand new mission, although it probably won't be out until this. It might not be out until the spring, though I might speed that up in time for Timberwolf's announced next Foundry challenge. It's actually a follow-up to Trouble in Paradise and a James Bond homage. I'm calling it Mirrorball. And in part, it's meant to kind of address a big plot issue that came up with Season 11. Basically, the premise of that was that the whole story behind the legend of the Toxu Tot was supposedly just a pack of lies concocted by Section 31. And obviously with the Season 11 missions, that's turned out not to be the case. So part of my reason for doing this is to kind of explain that away.
Which is always a risk that we run as authors, that Stowe might usurp our plots in official missions.
This is why I try to stick with things that aren't very close to the Stowe story.
Well,
yeah, but I mean, even in this case, it wasn't an obvious...
I didn't,
yeah, this is true.
I didn't think they'd get into the Toxu Tot that quickly.
Although that whole thing with that cave on Risa, I was always kind of wondering about that because it reminded me of that one cave that Picard was looking around in. Also, that tent with all of those different weird artifacts. I have to wonder what the heck that was put there for.
Foreshadowing, maybe.
The ways of the devs are mysterious.
Yes, extremely mysterious. Like that volume they added to the edge of the Risa map where you fall underwater. I mean, you walk to the edge of the map, and then all of a sudden you fall off the edge, and you're underneath the water instead of standing just below the water.
Well, that's an error in the geometry. I don't think that's intentional.
I don't think it is unintentional. I think they were putting it there for a reason, but I don't know what they were planning to do with it.
So I think, if I remember correctly, when we were live streaming the new Cardassian missions, Pax, you were saying that some of the changes might affect your missions.
Well, fortunately, that turned out not really to be the case. I only had to make a few little minor tweaks to my dialogue in Ghost of War Part 3. What I wound up doing is with that mission is streamlining a bit more. Basically cut out the first 2 maps altogether, the Romulan portion of the mission, and kind of explain that part of the story in the opening dialogue. And then I moved the mission door for that into Alpha Quadrant. I think it's Minos Corva now. And basically just picked it up with the Klingon portion of that mission. And then I've done some more dialogue tweaks too, and I also got rid of the mid-mission transfer to sector space that I used to have. I basically my idea was to kind of streamline it and shorten it up a bit.
Those can be a little awkward anyway. Trying to go back to sector space in the middle of a mission.
And I have gotten feedback from some people that that's kind of confusing. So I figured it, as long as I had at least considered story changes to Part 3, I figured while I was at it, I might as well just go ahead and do a full, partial redesign of it anyway. Other than that, I don't think I've made any really big changes to any of the maps themselves, other than cutting off the first two.
Well, the person I really feel bad for is Winnin, or Winoid, because his mission was a direct follow-up to the Goralis mission, where you go to the farming colony, and that is completely gone now.
Oh man, yeah.
It was his one that he put in for the New Year's contest.
Yeah, that's too bad. And I actually like that. Was that Seeds of Descent? Was that the one?
Yeah.
I like.
I think so. Yeah.
Was that the name of it?
Yeah, that was my.
Yeah, I enjoyed that mission.
The missions that got cut.
I mean, there were certain missions that got cut that I will not miss at all. But there are a couple that were that one and the Klingon Triple one.
That was a funny mission, yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call that one well developed, though.
I think the only one of my missions that actually got directly affected by a cryptic story rewrite is Bavat's Legacy, and even that one is kind of like a minor thing. And that, I mean, because Bavat's still a major enemy in the Fed Klingon storylines, and I don't actually do all that much with him, but well.
Yeah, and the only one that I have a few sort of like oblique references to a couple of those missions, mostly just saying, I think in my Mirror Universe mission, I have a dialogue line that says something like, "Oh, these sensor readings indicate these intruders are from that same alternate universe that we've encountered before." So I don't have to change that. So obviously, we have plenty of run-ins with the Mirror Universe in these new missions.
Well, thinking about it, I mean, we did the Make Diplomacy Go mission, which is probably somewhat dated in its references. Yeah,
because we did that before Delta Rising. And before we found out the reason for the whole Iconians attacking everybody thing was, the Undine attacking everybody, because the Iconians were messing with them, making them think it was us. So, yeah, I mean, that one may be a little dated. But that's okay. Anyway, Dragoon, have you had time to get into the Foundry since it's been back up?
A little bit. Mostly I have been taking care of those tweaks to Part 2 to get that publishable and getting that back up. I think I had a little trick with where I would surround NPCs with invisible walls to prevent them from you being able to talk to them. And for some reason now, you can talk to them through the invisible walls. Mm-hmm. So I redid that so it just swaps out the NPCs when it's time for them to talk. Yeah, they do that little beam animation thing, but oh well.
Makes sense. Isn't there an NPC that doesn't do that, though?
Not an NPC contact, though. And since
there's an NPC group that does it.
Yeah. And since I'm having them go from not being able to talk to them to being able to talk to them, it doesn't work in that direction.
Mm-hmm. All right. Mark, have you been able to get into the Foundry much?
Well, I finally decided to make a concerted effort to figure out exactly what I need to do to get my mission, the Beta Rana Incident, back out of bugged status. Yeah, it's actually been several years now since that one got bugged and became unplayable, and I haven't actually managed to come up with a good plan yet. And the main reason why I'm so bothered by this is because I did one of those Sky Castle things that, worked out rather well. It's just that rebuilding it would be hours and hours of work. I think I actually spent like a week or so working on the original. So
what's the issue with it right now?
Okay, this is one I built on a map that used to have a gigantic black void, then got cropped so that it doesn't.
Can you copy paste it into another map?
No, not not exactly, because it's a complex thing where I have several things that have default dialogues and stuff like that.
Okay.
So I would have to move those objects separately. I actually made a list. Okay, so the coordinates that my thing uses is let's see here, minus 1594 to minus 1392, and from plus 1200 to plus 1495. Those are the extents that it comes up to. None of the actual maps in the game that we currently have the right set of boundaries for that, because the Bejor Fire Caves one comes up high enough that I could use it, but it doesn't go over quite far enough. And, you know, same sort of thing is true of several others. Actually, none of them actually, except for the newest ESD map, come far enough left that I could use it, but the new ESD map has other reasons that I couldn't possibly use it, namely the fact that it's not a giant black void. It's just a giant map. I don't think I could actually reposition the assets in their current state because of the fact that they are outside the boundaries where you're allowed to place assets. So I don't think the game would allow me to shift the assets to a new location without moving them inside the playable bounds.
Well, you know, it might not be a bad thing to completely rebuild it, because I imagine you can do it faster and better the second time, more efficient on assets, and because you know exactly what you need from it and exactly how it was laid out the last time.
Well, I'm going to have to at least rebuild part of it anyways, because of the fact that all of the objects that have dialogues attached to them are going to have to be moved separately from the others. I'm not sure about the triggered objects. I think the triggered objects have issues if I simply copy-paste them, too.
They might survive. I don't remember triggered objects having any specific issues.
Well, they're things triggered by quest objectives, but we'll see. Anyways, those objects should be relatively
mission objectives should be fine, since they're referencing something outside the map itself.
Well, one of them I actually did this like kind of creative thing where the mission objective is to interact with a console that's inside a locked room, and there's a non-mission objective where to push a button on a console that's outside the locked room to open the locked room. That's one of the things that I had like a default dialogue tied to. So you walk up to the console, you can push the button on the console to open the door. Of course, you know, there's the annoying bug where if you copy an object that has a default dialogue, the default dialogue gets splattered all over the place, and that doesn't work very well.
Yes, I very much remember that one.
Well, see, one thing I was wondering about, though, is that if the trigger is attached to an object with a default dialogue, would the trigger get broken if it doesn't get copied along with the object with the default dialogue? Or maybe if I could copy the triggered object first, then copy the other one? I'm not sure.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's a bit of a complicated prospect.
Yeah.
It requires some trial and error. And error, and error, and error.
Also, certain of the objects that I placed had to be placed extremely precisely. Like, I actually have a picture on my DeviantArt thing of one of the more interesting parts of the mission. It's the transporter pad that I built for this mission. It doesn't look like a Federation transporter pad. It vaguely kind of sort of halfway resembles a Klingon transporter pad, but it doesn't really look like one of those either. I actually have a picture. See if I can find the picture quick. Anyway, though, rebuilding that would be a majorly pain in the butt, just because of how precisely I had to place everything.
Well, I'm just looking at what is the least painful pain in the butt course of action you can take.
The best option that I've been able to come up with is to separate the things other than the that don't have the dialogues and such like things attached to them, copy them separately, and then copy the main bulk of the map. Then of course I'll have to reposition all those objects to have the correct locations relative to the new map location, but it should work. Still going to be a lot of work, but hopefully it would be less than rebuilding the entire map from scratch.
Well, definitely sounds like you got your work cut out for you, though, on that one.
Yeah. Well, this is the reason why I hadn't gotten around to doing it yet, because I looked at it and it's like, okay, I'm going to have to do that. Oh boy,
It's a slightly monumental task.
Well, I mean, building the interior of that starbase. Okay, the interior and the exterior of the starbase were the two most time-consuming parts of the mission. I mean, the exterior of the starbase, when you just look at it, it doesn't really look like a whole lot of much, because, you're like, oh, it's the default starbase pieces. Until you realize that I carefully positioned them so that certain parts of the starbase overlapped each other, so that it looked like it was just a single giant object and not a collection of 12 smaller objects. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Fortunately, that didn't get broken, though.
That's good. Yeah, you don't have to worry too much about that on space maps. So I have been working in the Foundry, been working on a new mission of mine, follow-up to my Iconian War mission under Grey Skies. This one will be called Stand Up and Fight. And it is going to be rather huge, and hopefully I can make it not too long. I'm looking at about 11 maps. And I got a really good building session in on Friday or Saturday, I can't remember which, and got 3 maps of it pretty much done, except for maybe a few tweaks and frills to add. It helped, of course, that they were not custom map missions. It was, a space map and 2 maps that take place on the new ESD, which I'm using as a stand-in for another starbase. Luckily, there's only one place on that map that says Earth Space Dock, and that's easily overlooked. So, basically, what I was doing is setting up a huge battle on that space dock where you beam in and you look out over the giant room of the space dock there, and all you can see as far back as that room goes is Starfleet officers fighting a Lachi. So it should be quite a sight when you first beam in, and it's like, oh crap, well, better get fighting. But there's lots of allies, so I have no qualms in making a kill objective for 11 mobs. Because probably half the time the NPCs will get them for you. At least some. But I got all a lot of this dialogue I've had written for a month or more, so it was very nice to actually get to drop that in and get all the objectives in on these 3 maps, and it's a good chunk of the beginning segment of the mission. Coming up next will be a build, a custom build, which I'll probably do inside the big open area of the space dock so that I can have a few windows to look out to show you where you are. It'll be kind of a crazy one because it has to go from like either a transporter pad or a shuttle bay, and then you have to go be locked up in a brig, and then you have to escape from the brig, make it all the way to the airlock where your ship is docked, and then get onto your ship all on one map, because I don't really want to do any map transitions there. So I have to figure out how to make that look good. And then I have to figure out, there's this part where basically there's this admiral who is really not very good at his job, not a combat leader, not making good decisions, and you're going to run up against him time and time again, and he's going to lock you away, but you've got officers on your side who are going to bust you out so that you can go on a mission that everybody knows you need to do, and he's going to send ships after you to bring you back. Now, the question in my mind is, do I want to do that on a space map and have another, which adds another 2 map transitions, or do I want to do it all by dialogue so you don't see those ships sent after you? Because my intention is not to have you fight them. He'll send the ships after you, and then there'll be some dialogue. One of the ships turns back because they don't want to fire on fellow Starfleet officers. The other one keeps coming until the admiral's second in command finally, grows a backbone and relieves the admiral. And
maybe throw in a MacGuffin where your ship, in order to prevent the other Fed ship from pursuing it, destabilizes their warp field or something.
Could do that. Like maybe they're moving to cut you off across your trajectory, and you have to get in place and hit an interact and stop them dead in their tracks. That's an idea. But it adds another space map. But I think it's probably good, though, because
I think it's worth adding.
Actually see those ships that are coming after you.
Because it is such a big plot point. I'd rather you see that. It's not like
not have to do
it's
it
not
all
like
in
cutting out
dialogue.
a space map because we're just warping out of the system or something. This is kind of crucial to the plot.
No, there's actually stuff that happens. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that idea. That solves a little bit of a conundrum I was having. So 12 maps maybe. But luckily they upped it to 15, so anyway, that's what I've been working on, and then of course we will soon be getting back to the Starbase UGC project, our 6-mission series that we will be putting out very soon. I believe we're just waiting for Captain P.F. Dennis to do some more stuff with our promotional website, and then we'll be pretty much ready to publish those. The nice thing was is that they were done before downtime. So
looking forward to that.
Now these are not going to be Spotlight like Purity was.
That is not currently in the plan. That was something that we had worked out with Brand Flakes once upon a time. We haven't done that with these, but certainly who knows what is going to happen in the future.
Not that you guys are really itching to take on another project like this, but I think the next one you should do should be a KDF side. They could use more missions.
I think that would be great. It would definitely use more missions over there.
KDF's definitely more challenging to write for, but I think there's opportunity there.
All right.
Well, in some ways it's more challenging, but in some ways it's less challenging because the KDF doesn't have such a rigid adherence to rules and regulations that Starfleet does. So if you want to write that you're that that the player character got, ambushed and decided that the best course of action was to simply eradicate the ambushers and not even bother to ask them why they did the ambush, that actually kind of fits for a Klingon story.
Yeah, but it's harder to get into the motivations of Klingons because they're further than the Federation than to what we're used to.
Well, there's also the thing where you need to consider that the multiple races of the Klingon Empire have differing motivations for doing things.
True.
And that, honestly, to me, is the part that I find the most reason to struggle with, because, writing something for the, dyed-in-the-wool Worf-style Klingon who values honor and duty above all else, well, that's one thing. But, then you have the Orion pirate who serves the Empire because they're the highest bidder, more or less. I mean, and also if you read the actual official Stowe lore, I think it was the Nausicaans are in fact actually mercenaries working for the Klingon Empire, and are not actually a full member the same way that the Gorn and the Orions are.
I think it's just one of those things that getting away from the hats can be both a challenge
Indeed.
and an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. I think
because
it
the
can
various
be
races
fun.
of the various races of the Federation, yes, they have significant differences because the Vulcans, don't talk the same way humans do, but the various races of the Federation have more in common with each other than the races of the Klingon Empire do.
That's true. And maybe that's kind of an untapped opportunity there to really play those differences up.
Yeah. The Klingons have always struck me as lending themselves more toward epic sword and sandals type stories too.
I always describe them as Shakespeare as read by Vikings.
Yeah, that works.
Or samurai. Some combination of that. But yeah, I mean, it lends itself to this sort of, over-the-top Shakespearean stories. And I think it's very fun to write for Klingons.
Yeah.
And then there's the Orions, who I often describe as the most greedy people this side of Ferenginar, and the sneakiest people that aren't members of the Obsidian Order or Tau Siar.
Not thinking about it. Has anyone really done an Orion Syndicate mission?
I have not actually written any of mine specifically from an Orion point of view. I know Kirkfat included some optional dialogues tailored towards Orions in some of his missions.
Well, it wasn't from a player perspective, but the mission definitely dealt with the Orion Syndicate. Was one of the very first spotlights for Star Trek Online, the Syndicate Extraction by Galactrix. But it would be interesting to write one from the perspective of an Orion player. And maybe, go into the nuances of, how this arrangement between the Klingons and the Orion Syndicate works. And how it doesn't work.
Well, we do know several things about it. Because it's not like it wasn't explained at all. It's that it had a limited level of explanation. Because when you look at in the Path to 2409 stuff, we do have I guess you could say, a summary of the process by which the Orions joined the Klingon Empire. First off, we had Melanie Diane take over the Orion Syndicate and basically kick out everyone who wasn't an Orion, or demote them to servant status. One of the two. So that the Syndicate is now run entirely by Orions again. The second was that as a way of I guess you could say, compensating for the fact that the Orion homeworld was in the process of becoming uninhabitable completely, apparently. She arranged with she made a deal with the Klingons to get a new homeworld for the Orion race, and it would and that detail that deal is the official reason why the Orions became members of the Klingon Empire. Is that Melanie Dian brokered a deal where they become members and do what the Klingons tell them to do, and then they get a new homeworld in the bargain. Which, of course, meant that the Klingons had to find a very good planet to give to them. So, then from there, you have the Gorn War. Because all that stuff happened before the Klingons and the Gorn really started going at it. Because the Klingons and the Orions worked together to fight the Gorn and the Nausicaans. And eventually, they beat the Gorn and the Nausicaans, and the Gorn were subjugated, and the Nausicaans, when the Gorn were subjugated, basically went like, okay, well, the Gorn aren't going to pay us to fight for them anymore, so if you want to pay us to fight for you, we'll happily join you. And the Klingons accepted, apparently.
Okay, so I just had an idea for a series, but a way to change it up and make it not like the usual series. So you get a bunch of people together, and each do one mission from a different race's perspective. So one mission is for an Orion player. Next mission is for a Klingon player. Next mission is for a Nausicaan player, going on down the line. And so you could do that one of two ways. You either have a continuing story line that goes through all of them, or it's different versions of the same story.
I was just thinking that.
Well, the CERN Boulevard did something kind of like that, but it wasn't really written from the perspective of members of those races, but more a matter of writing about the various races.
Yeah.
Oh, you're talking about the Honor series.
Yes.
But I think what I'm envisioning is you have one sort of general plot and some general events that your player character is going to be a part of. And then each one is tailored to that specific race. But they sort of witness the same events, and what happens after is completely different based on who they are. I know there's a number of movies and things like that have been made in that sort of format where they tell the same story from like 5 different people's perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Well,
that could be
kind of
interesting.
kind of reminds me of the Day of Honor thing where you go around the bridge of the Bortis and you talk to the various members of the crew about their perspective of the concept of honor. And you get to the Orion guy and he's like, honor? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, it would all sort of start in the same place and then branch off into different directions. Obviously the Klingon one would deal with things that are very Klingon, and the Orion one would deal with things that were very Orion, criminal activity and that sort of thing, where you wouldn't do that in the Klingon one.
Maybe you could do something like this big incident that occurs, like just call it like the such and such system incident, and then it's just like major like snafu that almost breaks apart the KDF alliance, but told from like different races involved.
I'm trying to remember.
And each one kind of reveals something a little bit different about what really happened.
Well, one thing that I just thought of is that you remember the mission Krios Falling? That's when I think of where you have like something that's actually a big deal inside the Empire going on, because recapturing Krios after it had decided to sever ties with the Empire with the Federation's help.
There's a movie I'm trying to remember where it I don't know, I think it had like Forrest Whitaker in it, and it starts off with like a presidential assassination or something like that, and then it tells the story of what happens next from the perspective of 5 different people in it, and it goes through one person's perspective and then shifts through the whole thing and then shifts to the next one. Back to the beginning.
Vantage Point?
Vantage Point, that's the one. I haven't seen it, but I know what the format was.
Yeah, neither. Same here.
But in any case, you know, that's something to be considered in the future. But first, we got to get this one out, which should be very soon. I'd say probably in the next few weeks.
One thing that I was thing is that I actually have seen a few movies where they would, at the very least, show a certain scene from 2 or 3 vantage points. Not necessarily the entire movie, of course, but you know, like take one scene and look at it from 2 or 3 points of view. Actually, you know what? I think Independence Day did that, because you know you have the whole thing with the aliens launch their invasion. You have like 6 different people, and they take a few minutes to show each of these 6 different people's reaction to the when the aliens in Independence Day finally launched their initial invasion.
Well, I know there's always a few scenes that do that, where they show, and you can kind of see it in like big explosion shots or car crash shots. They always show it from different perspectives several times just to get the most out of their money.
There's also been talk on and off of doing that with the Avatar movies, making that any sequels to Avatar would follow that same war on Pandora between the humans and the Na'vi, but following a whole different group of humans and a whole different group of Na'vi, but basically the same war.
There's an episode of and now I always do this. I think of something and then I'm blanking on the title of it. Hang on a second. In any case, I'll figure out the name of the show later, but they get these 5 characters in a room and they're all reminiscing about this same thing that happened, this one event that happened years and years ago. And they all tell their perspective of it, and they're all radically different on what happened on this one night. And I think that could be a fun way to do it. Because it makes the series a little bit different from your, you know, simple 5-6 part story arc. Is that you essentially have a 1-part story arc told 6 different times in 6 very different ways.
And then I think it would be
or something like
cool if each part has like some piece to what's really going on, but only after you've played them all do you get the full picture.
Yeah, you'd find a way to drop little tidbits of story that, you know, maybe there's an initial mystery that you can't really solve until you've played all the parts and seen all the different things. Now, obviously, not everybody has a Orion, not everybody has a Nausicaan, but
look, here's a thought. What if there were Easter eggs within each mission that you could only know the answer to by having played the other parts? So
could be.
Yeah, I was actually kind of pondering that, because, you know, having knowledge about the mission prior to playing the mission will often cause a player to do things that they wouldn't otherwise think of doing.
yeah, maybe there's a console that's locked, but the key to unlocking the console is in another mission.
There you go.
Or
like
to talk to a certain person
computer
in one mission only because he was important in another mission. Maybe he's just a background character.
Like say in the Orion version, there's this Klingon guy who doesn't actually have any reason to want to talk to the Orion. But if you played the Klingon version of the mission, you know that this Klingon actually has important information if you can coax him into divulging it.
Yeah, there
He
you go.
happily gives it to Klingon players, but Orion players, not much.
Leverage is the name of the TV show I was looking for.
Ah. Leverage was a good show.
It was. So let's move it along because we've got an interesting thing to discuss tonight. Zero sent out a tweet last week that I found very interesting. Sort of a preliminary putting forth of an idea. She suggested taking some of the NPCs from our missions, custom ones that we've made, and putting them in the NPC tab for people to use. So let's see what you guys think of that, and what are the pros, what are the cons, how it could work. What do you think?
Well, I'm intrigued by this idea. Especially because I know that we've all kind of created characters to serve various roles that weren't established by Cryptic. That maybe have used to other players.
Yeah.
Obviously, this would have to be voluntary, something that players offer to submit. So, I mean, I almost kind of want to think of this could run sort of like a contest, where maybe we'll Zero can pick 10 out of however many are submitted, and then you would include a picture and a short description of the character. So something like maybe a paragraph. Because, I mean, obviously, whatever the description has to, has to fit in the little descriptions for each character, and that has to be enough for whoever's using that character.
Well, one thing that I have to wonder though is this discussion seems to be currently taking place entirely from the perspective of player-created characters, and not characters that players created costumes for, because we do not have costumes for these NPCs pre-made in the Foundry.
Yes, this is characters originally created by authors.
Yeah. And essentially what would happen is that you would... I don't know if she'd be able to go into your mission and pull out the particulars of the costume that you built, or if you would have to, make a post with the slider, screenshots of the sliders like we do to share characters now. Obviously, Zero has more options for that sort of thing than we do, but... essentially it'd be a custom costume that you made to create a character. And then, a little, one sentence thing about that character. And then she puts it into the NPC tab. Anybody can use it.
I actually have quite a few characters that I would be happy to do that with. But the reason why I was wondering is because I also have something, I think, at least 3 characters that I've used in missions where I had to either use a costume created by another player, by what you mentioned with, making pictures of the sliders and all that stuff, or make it myself, such as the case of Loris and Linnea, because, I decided I wanted to use a NPC from a Cryptic mission that we didn't have in the Foundry already. Loris is, of course, the Vorta who takes over DS9 in the 2800 story arc. And, see, in the at the end of the story arc, she actually goes back home to the Dominion. So she's still out there somewhere. And Linnea is, of course, Admiral Quinn's secretary. One of the other ones I didn't create the costume for, but I used a costume somebody else built, was for Admiral Quinn, because you can't even... So some of them you can actually do dialogue windows where you see their face, even though you don't have a full costume for the character. But in Quinn's case, you can't even open a hailing channel to Quinn without creating a custom costume to duplicate his appearance.
So what I think her emphasis would be on is on our original characters that we come up with ourselves, rather than versions of cryptic NPCs that we don't have access to. Because she could just take the actual NPC and stick them in the stick them in the Foundry, as she has been doing.
Fine.
Actually, that reminds me of the fact that when I made the costume for Linnea, I actually made two versions of her, one of which uses the current Audi uniform, and another one that uses the old Sierra uniform that she used to wear before the ESD revamp.
So it occurs to me that something that authors would have to take into consideration is that once this character becomes a stock NPC, they're pretty much giving up creative control over that character, because then players will be free to use them however they see fit, and repurpose them if they want so choose. So, I mean, Pax, you've got
However,
that one.
you know, you don't necessarily give up control of what they do in your missions.
No, and I mean,
you can use them in your missions whenever you like. And you can, you know, you don't necessarily have to consider what somebody else does with your NPC as canon for your missions.
as much as any of our missions are canon to anything.
Yeah, exactly.
I still have to find amusement in pondering what someone would do with Endless, based on the short description of that it's a Borg Vorta with anger issues.
Well, that's
see something like that.
Zero's.
That's perfect. I think Zero would like that.
I know there's at least one of mine that I would be happy to submit, and you can probably guess which one that is.
that your secret agent.
Well, her too, Black Snow, but I was thinking Zashek, since Drogyn, you've used him.
Yeah, you already gave him to me in a mission that I haven't released yet. But yeah, no, that's a couple of good ones there. I think one thing that I'd encourage people to do if we end up doing this is submit their custom alien races that they've made. You know, a character example of that.
Oh yeah, I could do it with the Nevaeans too.
Yeah, the Nevaeans and Duncan Idaho with his Eevee. Those.
Other one, the Askar.
The Askar, of course.
In my case, the only one I can actually think of I would really want to submit is the what was that designation? I came up with an inorganic race that is the same type of life form as the Shellyak, which I represented. They're not the same species as a Shellyak, of course, but the same type of life form. And I represented that by doing an oily black version of oily black outfit that used certain parts of the Hirogen armor and a few other assorted things. I think I used bits of the Jem'Hadar suit too. But you know, it's a race that's kind of, you know, like designed to look like an inorganic but still humanoid species.
I imagine you would still have to submit a specific NPC.
Well,
Yeah.
I actually have like 4 of them that I created for the Fractal Nebula mission, because, you know, it's just like you find this little like weird spatial thingy, and you know, people from places you've never heard of show up to annoy you.
I mean, well, here's a question. I mean, should there be a limit on the number of NPCs that any specific author can submit?
You know, I think a lot of that part would have to be up to Zero. You know, she'd probably, if I were her, I think I'd maybe start a thread on the forums that said, you know, submit here, and make it very clear to people who says, you know, I or whoever above her might want to have authority over this, say, I will be the final authority I will choose the ones that I like. And, if you don't make it, keep submitting.
Also, your creations may or may not get produced immediately, based on the amount of time it takes to do the ones that I like more than yours.
Yeah.
Void except where local laws prohibit.
Well, that's the nice part about this contest is that it's not really a contest, and I don't think it would be subject to any international laws. Our Canadian friends and whoever else could enter their NPCs. Wouldn't be a problem because Cryptic already owns these anyway. So,
but I mean, I would.
Yep, it's the fine print in the Foundry agreement. And anything you create for the Foundry is owned by Cryptic.
Yes.
True, but a reminder that this would go doubly so since you're basically letting your creation out for use in the world.
Mm-hmm. And you'd have to be careful about which ones you submit because you don't want to submit someone that you've already killed off in a mission of yours.
True.
Unless you resurrected them in some way. Because we know that in science fiction, no death is permanent.
Oh, in my case, certain of the ideas that I created were, well, not something that I would really want to submit simply because it's something that's basically from like an alternate universe, not something that's really meant to be characters from the Star Trek universe even.
Yeah, I mean there's always going to be ones that, you look at and you say, nah, that one doesn't really fit to give out to everybody.
I mean, I wouldn't make this a specific rule, but I would generally encourage authors that submit their characters to think about characters that have broader use. Because, I mean, we've all created characters that are very specific to a mission or designed to work specifically in that scenario, but sometimes we also have characters that have broader use that might have a general tendency to show up.
Yeah, maybe ones that would make good mission givers. That's why I said Zashek.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
various admirals.
And basically
we've all made different admirals for our missions.
And NPCs that aren't too tied to their specific background, so that can function with only a few lines describing who they are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can't really convey that they've got this elaborate backstory to anyone using them.
But there's also, put in NPCs that are interesting or unique in some way, so that it's actually worth it to go to this effort to put them in because they're interesting, and they have something that isn't the same as all of the NPCs we have access to now. Like, I mean, I've got one from my latest mission, the 16-year-old shuttle pilot with an artificial arm. I think I'd put her in.
Okay, it was classification R3 that I was thinking of. But yeah.
So I think I'm getting that we like this idea.
Yeah, I'm certainly open to it.
I think there's not too many cons as long as people kind of understand going in what the deal is.
Yeah, and I think there would be a lot of authors that would be more than happy to share their NPC creations.
I think so. So Zero kind of made it clear to me that this was sort of a preliminary idea that she had, and she hadn't taken it to her superiors yet. And hopefully our discussion gives her some things to help her with that presentation. We'll see what happens.
And I would also like to throw this subject up as a community question.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys think of the idea of submitting player-made NPCs as official stock Foundry NPCs?
Or
if
if you feel like it, mention which of yours you would like to submit if
Oh,
they do that.
I am sure that that time will come soon enough, assuming
Yes.
anything comes of this.
All right. Well, for our next topic, Dragoon, why don't you fire up the Foundry?
Okay.
I thought we'd talk about patrols tonight, how to set them up, how to change them, and some of the things that you can do with patrols. So while he does that, one thing we should mention is that we are getting a new model for the Breen Dreadnought. These things generally make their way into Foundry at some point.
Yes, I actually looked at that today, and we do have, the Plush Breck, the Starthelm, and the Chilgret as customizable costumes in the Foundry. There are actually 2 entries for the Chilgret, and I'm not entirely certain what the differences between them are. They seem to be very similar, if not identical. Presumably there's something that's different about them, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah. And I'm not sure about that either. But the I believe the Breen space mobs that go in, they spawn the revamped ships. Is that right? Like, will a Starthelm spawn in one of those? I don't actually know the answer to that.
The only Breen ships that I've worked with were all reskinned.
If I remember right, the random encounter ones still actually use the old Starthelm model. I mean, the Plush Breck and Chilgret models, when they made them playable, they didn't actually like completely redesign them. They just tinkered with them to make them look better.
Yeah.
The Starthelm was the first of the Breen ships that they actually did a complete redesign on, and as far from what I've heard, the NPC mobs still actually use the old model, at least some of the time.
Mm.
And which is kind of interesting because the new Resref looks a lot like the old Starthelm, and the old Resref design, well, that was just screwball.
I never particularly cared for it.
It did have certain parts of it that were reminiscent of Breen technology, but the core of it was this weird spike shape that didn't resemble anything that Breen normally used.
Of course, now we got the lobster ship.
Yes, the lobster ship.
All right, so I've got the Foundry loaded up here.
Which is several people on the forum have pointed out is one of those things where when it drops out of warp, your immediate reaction is to run away.
It's a mean-looking thing. All right, Dragoon, why don't you load up a map and start talking us through how to set up a patrol.
All right. Well, we are going to need an NPC group. We want to just do just one, or do we want to do an entire group?
Let's do an entire group for the moment.
Okay, so let's just do a Federation squad. Captain 03, so they're nice. I am going to start them in one room and have them do a patrol through the corridors. Maybe even do something where they fight some bad guys along the way.
There you go.
Okay, so the first step is we are going to need the patrol behavior, which is only available for NPC groups. It's not available for NPC contacts. And once you flip on that setting, you'll notice that got this little indicator here. And this represents all of our patrol points. Or I should say all of the waypoints that they hit as they make their patrol. All right, so we can continue to add new points. Got buttons here for add point before, add point after, whatever our selected point is. And while I assume there is a limit to the total number of points that we can add, I don't think I've ever actually tested.
No, I haven't looked at that.
I think it might be something like 20.
Okay, so something that you're really going to have to try and...
I vaguely remember seeing a limitation along those lines when I was tinkering with it a long time ago, but didn't really write it down. So
now, one of the difficulties I've had in setting up patrols sometimes is not getting the nodes in the right order, where they'll walk the path backwards from what I wanted them to walk it. So as you're looking at this, Dragoon, is there an easy way to tell which node comes first and which node comes second, third, etc.?
Don't really know, but as you can see, I've...
As you can see, we've got a crisscross in yours.
Yeah.
Isn't it doesn't it go by numbers?
I believe the nodes are numbered in some way.
Because if I remember right, when you place the nodes, I think it has the character move through the nodes in the order that you placed them on the map.
Yeah, I've just been adding point after, and that usually is enough to...
Mm-hmm. But as you can see on yours, even though we have a little bit of a delay...
yeah, I grabbed the wrong one. And
yeah. And it's easy enough to grab the wrong one after you've placed a point after or before.
Because they're right next to each other.
They are, exactly.
One thing I've gotten in the habit of doing is placing more. Once I get done to the end of my path and I want to go back to the start, I place more nodes to basically retrace the path in the opposite direction.
Yeah, because no matter what you do, it's a loop.
That would ensure that whichever way they go in that loop, they're going exactly the way you want them to.
And as you can see with the dotted line leading across my map, patrols are loops. So if you...
They'll always go back to the spawn point.
Yeah. In this case, I'm going to assume that we don't want it to loop. And I am going to actually plan.
As a side note, I noticed you're using one of the maps that I use in Valley of the Shadow 1, which also happens to be probably the one where the one mission of mine that uses patrols the heaviest.
Okay. Can't delete patrols. Good. Apparently added a point at the wrong... Alright, so I'm just going to have them walk here, and then I'm going to... What I'm thinking about doing is putting a reach marker here. So the idea is the player follows this group battling their way through, and then when reach marker when they get here swaps out my NPCs for
something else.
Something else. So for
This is
ease
one of
of
the things you
use-
have to be careful with, though, because doesn't the reach marker track the player's location and not the mob that you're wanting to trigger?
Yeah, so you have to make sure that you tell the player that they need to follow.
Yes. Okay, so I've actually got a group of cadets going here. You're leading a training mission. I am actually going to start out with... Okay, so I got my control. So let's call this control moving. That's just to kind of help me keep the group straight. All right, it is going to let me duplicate it. Sure why, but oh well.
That happens. There must be certain conditions.
Yeah, sometimes it just gets a little weird. Cadet 5. I pick cadets because they're easy and like at the top of the list. Okay, so this is going to be my starting group here. So I'm just going to have these guys standing around until they're ready to move. So, go ahead and get rid of this guy. Toss him over here real quick because I'm going to put a NPC contact that's going to start all this off. Okay. Go ahead and throw roll in. We're going to start off with a dialogue with contact. We're going to need a reach marker to end.
Now, don't forget to set the speed of your patrol.
Yes.
Yeah, there's that infamous cutscene from the bridge of Aeron's ship where you see the one Jem'Hadar running in slow motion behind him.
Yeah.
That was a rather amusing example of what happens if you set the patrol speed wrong.
Yeah.
And it'll take a little bit of trial and error before you get it exactly how you want it. I think like 8 to 10 is a decent walking pace.
And 15 to like 17 is a sprinting pace.
Yeah.
Because I set it for the first map of my Twilight of the Gods series for the Klingons. I made the opening scene is in a battle on Hathon, and I got a bunch of Makos rushing toward the battle scene, and I have their patrol speed bumped up to like think it's as high. I think it's 17. So they're going at a full sprint toward the battle.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I'm going to be doing in my upcoming mission, is having almost like a D-Day style invasion where you got a bunch of your good guys on one side of the map landing in shuttles, and they got to run across this field to attack an enemy emplacement with you running with them. So we're going to need a good sprinting pace for that.
Okay. Then I got another duplicate of the cadet group, and I'm going to put at the end here.
Remind me, what is the NPC limit? Or the NPC group limit?
Isn't it like 25?
Yeah, something like that.
They're just going to be standing here at the end. So that's patrol end. Okay. Let's set up some triggers here. So, start group's going to start out by being visible, and then is going to go invisible when objective in progress, escort the cadets is in. It's active. Patrol moving, on the other hand, will not show up until objective in progress, escort the cadets, and will disappear on objective complete, escort the cadets. Patrol end doesn't show up until objective complete, escort the cadets. Okay, so we got 3 stages. Oh, and we got the NPC we gotta. Objective complete. Which works out perfectly. Okay, so good do a so congratulations, we made it.
So essentially what you're doing here is using a player triggered thing to despawn those NPCs so that they don't loop infinitely.
Yes.
Through their patrol. They
And
go where you want them and then despawn.
And I've got a reach marker here right at the entrance to the final room, which so the player will trigger it once they cross the threshold. And that then I throw up a pop-up box to kind of cover my transition a bit. All right, so and just to make this interesting, let's put in some enemies. Klingons will do.
Well, one thing I thought of is that this seems like a good time to point out that when you're placing reach markers, you need to be 100% certain that the player will trigger them when you want them to. One thing that I often do when I'm putting one where it's triggered by someone walking into a room is to make it so that the reach marker is actually a really, really big circle. Well, technically, reach markers are actually spheres. But on ground, the elevation of them usually doesn't matter. Usually, some missions it will matter a lot. But for this purpose, it won't matter because the center of the sphere is at ground level. So it might as well be a circle. Anyway,
right,
if you make it a really big circle, it will be almost flat across the doorway, so that when someone comes up to the doorway, you won't have a variation between whether they're off to the left or off to the right or something like that.
All right, so I think this is a pretty good setup. I don't think I'm missing any go ahead and give this a try.
Yeah.
And of course, you don't have to come up with anything this fancy if you just want to have NPCs just walking around idly. Like, say, for instance, you're doing a market. Maybe you can have a NPC that loops around the block, or goes back and
Combine
forth.
some patrols with the wander function.
I've seen some people put in non. What was it? I guess you could say. I forget the word. Wait a minute. Enemies you don't have to kill, but they're enemies all the same. That will walk, like, loop around a building, like they're guarding the building.
I do that in Valley of the Shadow 2.
Yeah, and I did that in Purity 6, where you have to go through a prison camp to find one particular prisoner, and there's guards on patrol, and you can either engage them or not, as you choose.
Yeah. And if done right, it adds a little bit of tactical thinking to a mission.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's talk to this cadet here, and so I set it up so there's a not yet, so you can choose not to go yet, and that'll prevent the objective from completing. But let's say we're ready to go. Oh, I messed something up. Did I forget to... I bet you I forgot to connect my reach marker.
Now, it's worth noting that, final pathing is not calculated until you hit publish. So occasionally you will run into things where your patrols won't work exactly right in preview. They generally work mostly right, but not completely.
Yes, and if you're wondering why is pathing not calculated until publish, it's because it makes up a fair chunk of the time it takes to publish a mission. So if we had to calculate pathing for every preview, we'd be waiting around for our previews quite a long time.
Yes.
Okay, try this again.
So, Dragoon, did you figure out what your deal was?
Yep, I forgot to hook up my reach marker to the objective, so it was autocomplete. Okay, let's try this again. Yeah, they do the beam out thing, but oh well.
There are certain things that we can't get around.
And this is where you see them start to get stuck on things. Obviously, if we had panthing, they would be able to navigate around. For the most part, it's working.
One thing I do with my patrol mobs is group the actors to kind of as tightly together as I can. So
and
to
they've
kind of
engaged our first group of enemies.
Because they will move in formation, essentially.
Yeah. Like I said, it's a little better in live since they have pathing data. Right now, they're just kind of doing the best they can blind. Luckily, the map floor is pretty flat, so...
Yeah, you definitely want to make sure your patrols are somewhere where it's they're not gonna hang up on stuff. They've got good level floors, nothing that disappears underneath them via triggers as well.
We're down to one cadet. They've all gotten stuck. Fortunately, my bridge officers also don't have any pathing.
Yeah. They will probably get less stuck if you were to publish this.
They have some navigational
if you have patrols, it's a good idea to do a test publish. In fact, it's generally always a good idea to do test publishes.
Luckily, I didn't make the... Okay, so at least our one lone Look at that as still chugging along.
As you might remember in Valley of the Shadow 3, I use this map with this long corridor, and I do pretty much the opposite of what you're doing here. I have the player go in one direction, and I have patrol mobs coming from the other direction to fight you.
I remember that. That was a fun run and gun sequence.
Yeah, you can kind of use it to set up like a gauntlet. You know, you enter this, you know, hit a reach marker when you enter this hall. It spawns NPC group at the far end. They run towards you. When you defeat them, that spawns another mob at the far end of the hall that runs towards you. That defeat them spawns another one.
That's exactly how I set up that sequence.
Yeah.
So I've actually used patrols. Oh, and we got reached the our reach marker. Congratulations, we made it. And our group is waiting for us at the end, which is actually a completely different NPC group, but I won't tell.
Nobody needs to know that.
I was going to say, I use patrols to have a group of enemies coming through a breach and attacking a position you're trying to hold.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be used for that.
You can also use it to kind of stage battles. Start off a group of friendly NPCs at one side of the map, start off a group of enemy NPCs at the other side, set patrols straight towards each other.
All right, and I think anything else we should cover about patrols?
How about put one down for that NPC group that does not beam out or in.
Oh, you mean
if you remember which one that is?
I don't know that I can make them battle, or that I want to make them battle.
No, you wouldn't. But in this case, you could do a thing where you spawn one instance of him and have him patrol down a hallway where and tell the player to follow. Reach a reach marker. He despawns. An NPC spawns of the same type that you can talk to. Have a conversation and says, "Okay, follow me again." Spawn another one, and keep following them further down the hall. Stop and have another conversation.
Okay, this sounds a little more complex than I want to get to in a tech topic.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is just some of the things you can do that we've been talking about here. Because, I mean, there's all kinds of different things that you can do with patrols. One of the things patrols could help you do, just off the top of my head, is help you set up a timer if you wanted.
True. Assuming you have a good space to work with.
Yeah. If you had a nice empty room to work with, you could set up a patrol, an NPC to patrol around that room and eventually encounter another mob and fight, and trigger something off one of them dying.
Yeah, the only thing is that you can't make it too far away from the player, otherwise the NPCs won't spawn, and they'll never fight.
Mm.
But what you can do is...
Question, is that a two-dimensional distance or a three-dimensional distance?
Imagine it's three-dimensional. It's whatever the... Because the engine is designed...
It's like draw distance.
Yeah, the engine's designed to only draw
similar to that.
NPCs out to a certain distance. In fact, there's a setting in your options that adjusts this distance.
But I know what you can do. So, I mean, when you put down an NPC group, there's that node that lets you select all of them at once. If you leave that node near the player and move individually the NPC contacts in their group off to somewhere else, they will spawn, because it spawns based on where that group node is, not where the individual nodes are.
Yeah, but even if the individual NPCs if they're too far away, they won't draw. And if they don't draw, they don't fight. It's
not something I've tested over great distances. But I've had, things where on like a big ground map, if I have NPCs off in the distance that I need to have spawn right away, they don't. But if I move that node close to the player and then move the individual pips for the NPCs back to where they were, they will spawn.
Which, by the way,
I haven't tested the distances and stuff on that.
I was going to say, for those interested, my preferred no B-Man animation NPC group is Targ Neutral Squad Captain 01. They will not have the B-Man effect, so they will just fade in, which is handy for swapping out NPCs. But as I was pointing out to Drogyn earlier, they're friendly to the player, but they are. I think they will attack enemies, but they'll probably do it like Targs.
I don't remember if they will attack or not.
Oh, hang on, I might be thinking of the wrong.
If they're neutral, I think they can be attacked, but they won't attack on their own.
No, I mean, neutral is supposed to mean that they don't favor a specific faction. But yeah, I think it's some of my unofficial tests I found that they will attack enemy groups. Like I said, but since they're Targs, they'll do it by probably headbutting them. You try to reskin them.
Yes.
I have always wondered why they don't have a punch animation for that. Why is it that they even have a headbutt animation in the first place? I don't get that.
Well, what it is it's a bite animation for the Targs, and I think it's just the closest analogy you can get when you tag that animation for a humanoid model.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like what happens when you reskin Tholians, where their weapon animation just doesn't play right. And so you have characters that stand around like they're not shooting at you, even though they are.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of the animation sets for the animals and the humanoids not lining up right. Although I did find out by sheer accident that if you set an animal like a Targ to talk, it'll start howling.
That's pretty funny.
It inadvertently failed to reskin an NPC I had doing a talk animation, and so he appeared as a SAR that just kept howling around at things.
But, I'd say that could be useful if that's what you needed.
True.
All right, well, that is patrols, and I'm sure people find lots of creative uses for it, as we always do. But I think we're going to go ahead and end it there for the evening. So, Dragoon, if you want to throw up our contact info.
Okay. We can be reached by email at foundryroundtable@live.com. We are also on Twitter at foundryroundtab, where you can submit your answer to our community question about your thoughts on the adding Foundry-made NPCs as official stock Foundry contacts. Drogyn can be reached at Drogyn1701. Mark can be reached at Markhawkman. And I can be reached at Greendragoon.
And I can be reached at NCC89471. No dash, at least not on Twitter.
All right, well, we will say good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.